Awesome. Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today in the PARC Disease Task Team webinar, Healthy Herps to Homes, Safe Trades and Fresh Starts. My name is Jenna Palmisano. I serve as a chair for the National Disease Task Team, and I'm also a PhD candidate in Dr. Anna Savage's lab at the University of Central Florida, where I study the genomic and physiologic influences of emerging pathogens on pygmy rattlesnakes. We are pleased to kick off today's webinar, and our goal with these webinars and our webinar series is to help connect science and management action by providing information to land and natural resource managers. And so we welcome any input and feedback that you might have. And so just some housekeeping items before we begin. If you need live captioning, it's available. You can click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the PARC Disease Task Team webpage as well as our YouTube. And all attendees are going to be muted during the presentation, but you can submit any of your questions at any time during the presentation via the chat. And we have people monitoring the chat, so we'll address them at the end during a question and answer session. So on behalf of PARC, we'd like to thank the members of the Disease Task Team for coordinating the webinar and developing many resources to improve the awareness of disease threats to amphibians and reptiles, including disease-specific fact sheets, which are available on our website, and we will insert that link in the chat shortly. And a special thanks to our speakers for sharing their time and expertise with us. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Veronica Vargas, and she is with the she is a non-native fish and wildlife biologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, who runs the day-to-day operations of the Exotic Pet Amnesty Program. With years of experience in invasive species research, as well as wildlife disease expertise, Veronica has supported efforts in developing and improving strategies for managing invasive species and addressing disease in both captive and wild animal populations. Our second speaker is Dr. Matt Gray, and he is the CEO and president of the Healthy Trade Institute. Matt Gray is also a professor of disease ecology at the University of Tennessee. And Dr. Gray has been researching various aspects of herpetofaunal health for over 20 years, and most recently has been helping businesses incorporate basic healthy trade practices into their operations. So with that, thank you, speakers. I forgot to change the slide. Please take it away. I'll stop sharing that, and then you can go ahead and share yours.
Okay, is that coming through?
Yes, looks great.
All right. 1 second. Perfect. All right. Thank you very much, Jenna, and thank you to PARC and the organizers for this webinar. This is really an exciting opportunity to talk with a large number of folks. I think there are over 200 people that were registered from a diverse array of stakeholders out there, including state and federal employees, nonprofit organizations, pet owners, businesses that sell pet amphibians and reptiles, etc. So really excited to have this opportunity to share a little bit about what the Healthy Trade Institute is doing, and also how it overlaps with what Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission is doing with their amnesty program, which Veronica is going to talk about. I'd like to acknowledge our board members, which you can see here. So this talk is about trade, about the trade, the selling, the buying and selling of pet amphibians and reptiles, and ultimately, occasionally, pet owners are unable to take care of their pets after a period of time, and they need to get rid of them. Okay, so I'm going to start off and just talking very broadly about wildlife trade, then talk a little bit about pet amphibian trade and also pet reptile trade, what we're seeing globally, but also here in the United States, and some of the issues that can come with that. Then I'll pass it on over to Veronica, who will talk a little bit about their program of amnesty, and then we'll swing back around to the Healthy Trade Institute about our adoption program that we've recently launched. So, wildlife trade in general is a huge industry. It's been growing over the past 20, 30 years. It's estimated to be around a $300 billion annual year industry with over 2 billion specimens per year. Around a third of those are live, which is really the focus of this talk. Around 1,000 species in 180 nations are participating. And the high income countries, such as the United States, the European Union, the UK, and Japan, really are driving the market demand. When it comes to amphibian trade, the US actually comprises about 50% of the global imports. And we import around 4 million amphibians per year, and about 2 million of those are destined to the pet trade. The other 2 million are generally destined to the food trade. One of my colleagues over at Washington State University shared some data with me recently that looked at the number of online businesses here within the U.S. that are listing, a variety of species of pet amphibians. And so they're listed here in ranking order. And so interestingly, one of the most commonly traded pet amphibians is a salamander, the axolotl, followed by several frog species that probably a lot of you are familiar with, such as species of dart frog, White's tree frog, Pac-Man frogs, and red-eye tree frogs. And when it comes to this, is basically searching online stores that are selling these animals. The states that kind of lead that network are Florida and Texas, with also a fair number of stores being located in the Northeast and California. So Pedro also broke down the data and kind of looked at what is sort of the percentage of animals that are being traded that are wild caught versus those that are captive bred. There's been sort of a shift and a move in at least the pet amphibian industry, well, actually reptiles too, to be more captive bred. And what his data showed, this actually breaks it down by IUCN listing down here. But what his data showed that about half of the animals being traded are wild caught, and the other half are captive bred. And if he didn't have this over time, this is just most recently from last year. But if you look at a trend over time, these kind of orange colored bars which would be much larger. So the wild caught would be much larger. So we're seeing more and more captive bred animals being a part of domestic and even international trade. One other thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that here in the US, so this is the green tree frog, is actually up there as being sold by a fair number of businesses that are online, which is one of our native species. And those animals are typically wild caught. Okay, if you look at the reptile industry from a global perspective, it is huge. It's with respect to number of animals, we're talking about like 40 times the number of amphibians that are traded internationally, and a lot more species, a lot more countries. The group of reptiles that actually leads global reptile trade are turtles, followed by lizards and snakes. Here in the U.S., it's quite interesting. So I have some colleagues over at Rutgers that summarized some data from Fish and Wildlife Service recently. And over the past 20 years, we're importing around a million animals, which is actually less than the number of amphibians that we are importing. However, the difference is that the species richness, the number of species we're importing for reptiles is much greater than amphibians. So this bar here, this purple bar here, are reptiles, and amphibians are over here in green. So around 4 to 5 times greater number of species of reptiles. But the magnitude of that trade is actually smaller. On the flip side, our domestic trade of reptiles from the captive bred standpoint is huge. And if you look at what folks are searching, some of the indicators of demand, this is a great paper that was published in Animals a few years ago, just kind of looking at the trends in pet reptile trade. Um, this is based on internet searches. So this is like going through and doing a web scrubbing activity here. And with respect to web searches, the species that have in the past and currently are commonly searched are bearded dragons, ball pythons, leopard geckos, and corn snakes for reptiles. And if you go to a lot of the online stores or even trade shows, those are the animals that tend to dominate the inventory that is available. Um, Species that seem to be decreasing in popularity are chameleons, red-eared sliders, boas, Burmese pythons, green iguanas, and king snakes, and that's for probably a variety of reasons. And some groups that seem to be gaining in popularity are crested geckos in the U.S., blue-tongued skinks in Australia, African fat-tailed geckos in Japan, and tegus in South America. So with that, we do have this interactive poll system. And so we're going to launch our first poll. And this has to do with whether you have ever owned a pet amphibian or a reptile personally. And if you may need to scroll down because there's more than, so you can select multiple answers here. And if you scroll down the last option for the very first question, there's actually two questions, is I've never owned an amphibian or reptile. So make sure you look at all the options and click on as many boxes as is appropriate for yourself. And then go on to question two, which is regardless of owning a pet amphibian or reptile, which do you think is best to be available for purchase? Okay, and it has to do with wild caught or captive bred, etc. And we'll leave that open for a little while.
We'll give it to 1 minute and 30 seconds. So 12 more seconds to answer. We've got about 80% of everyone answered there. So also it's still increasing that. So I'm just letting it happen still. All right. There you go. So we're going to share the results with all of you so you can see it. And Matt, you should be able to see those as well.
Yep, I can. So it looks like maybe about a third of folks have never own amphibians, and then about two-thirds are amphibians and reptiles, and about two-thirds have, with most folks owning reptiles. Okay, so snakes, lizards, tortoises, etc. So I think that's probably fairly reflective of folks that own pet amphibians or reptiles. Most folks own reptiles, and then some folks own amphibians, and some own both. We didn't have that as an option. And certainly, if you look across the cross section of, we've got a biased probably sample here with the folks that are tuning in because most folks are very interested in amphibians and reptiles. But if you look across, the country, not everybody owns a pet amphibian or reptile, but it is a growing pet industry without question. The other question was captive bred versus wild caught. And I think that these results certainly reflect what we have been suspecting for a while, based on what businesses have reported to us, is that folks are very supportive or much more supportive of captive bred. And there's a variety of reasons. Obviously, collecting from the wild negatively impacts populations, but there may also be a greater disease threat of animals coming into the trade, bringing in pathogens from the wild. And of course, there's always some folks that don't think that we should be, that amphibians and reptiles shouldn't be a part of the pet trade. Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you, Jenna. Now, how do I get that off my screen? Maybe if I just click over here. Now, see, now this poll is right in the middle. Oh, there we go. I see. Here we
You
go.
got it?
Yeah, I got
Okay, cool.
it. All right. So how big is this industry? It is a growing industry. So we've done some economic analysis here at the University of Tennessee. We've estimated that the industry is probably about around $10 billion, produces about $10 billion in revenue every single year, with over 10,000 businesses and millions of customers. And so just to kind of give you an idea, over on the right side is gives you kind of the magnitude. So it's about equivalent to the U.S. wheat industry, which is a pretty, important agricultural crop and half the size of the NFL. So for those that are football fans, it's a fairly complex network when it comes to pet trade, perhaps more complex than a lot of other trade networks. And so not only do we have, of course, importers. Those importers can branch off and go lots of different directions. A lot of times they'll go to a wholesaler who then is distributing to a variety of entities. So, of course, we've got retailers, we have folks that are breeders, but also retailers. And then hobbyists we define as, small breeders, okay, not just pet owners. Pet owners, these folks are supplying to the pet owners. So hobbyists are, maybe their revenues are maybe 5,000 a year. They're doing it on the side. And then there's also this very interesting, it's not meant to be in the smallest polygon here, but there's this other very interesting dynamic component of trade shows that exists throughout the United States and in many, many other countries. So we can imagine these animals coming in, and there's lots of interaction between all these different groups, right? But one thing we need to remind from a healthy trade standpoint is that the animals are not just being traded themselves, they also have microbes on them. Some of those are very beneficial microbes that help with the health of the animal, and then some are actual pathogens that can make animals sick within captivity. But we also talk about spillover into wild populations, which we'll talk about in just a second. Um, so the interaction, oh, this is just indicating a microbe. So the interaction of these different components of this trade network can be influenced by lots of different things. And consequently, not only the movement of animals, but the movement of pathogens. Clearly government can have regulations or outreach educational programs and things like that. Consumer demand itself can actually drive it if they are demanding healthy animals, for example, or certain species. And then industry can respond in a variety of ways independently or in response to both government and consumers. And one thing in general that I think everyone is in support of, those that are in the pet trade and those that are part of other entities that are on this call and elsewhere, is that we want to prevent this unwanted release. And generally this happens for animals that folks no longer can take care of. And there's lots of reasons from, a lot of them are economic related and folks going through hardship, etc. And so there aren't a lot of opportunities or there's a lot of rescue centers out there for various pets, but a lot of them don't accept pet amphibians and reptiles, nor have the expertise to. And so they think it's a good idea to just release it into the wild. And obviously that can create issues like you see here with invasive species. That's a reticulated python that was caught in Tennessee last year. And it can create this thing that we call pathogen spillover, where there's pathogens on the animal. And that animal, even if it may not survive very long, can come in contact with other animals, native species, and it can transmit. Pretty much all the pathogens that amphibians and reptiles can become infected with can transmit very easily just through very simple contact, or they can shed the pathogen into the environment, they can pick it up. So, one thing that Veronica will talk about is their amnesty program in Florida and, trying to prevent invasive species. And I'll talk later about the HTI nationwide herp adoption program. And there's lots of evidence out there about amphibians, being infected with different pathogens such as rhinovirus, the BD chytrid fungus, as well as the B. sal chytrid fungus, which is the recently discovered fungus that really affects salamanders pretty significantly, but can infect anurans as well. And similarly with reptiles, there's lots of information that show that, these animals are being moved, but they're also being moved with a variety of pathogens that are of concern, such as adenovirus, cryptosporidium, and ophidiomices. And from a global perspective, the World Organization for Animal Health is there to list pathogens as notifiable. But for the most part, reptile pathogens and amphibian pathogens are generally ignored, although both the chytrid fungi, BD and B. sal, as well as rhinovirus, are listed by WOA as a notifiable pathogen. That is supposed to then, for member nations, require an animal health certificate. But the kind of conundrum is that here in the US, as well as many other countries, we're about to submit a paper on this. The requirement of animal health certificates often falls within the Department of Agriculture, which generally does not have, even though they're in charge of the health, they are the regulatory agency in charge of health in most nations. They often don't regulate the health of wildlife. And these are animals being imported. They're generally considered wildlife. And so that kind of creates this regulatory loophole that doesn't require animal health certificates. So here in the U.S., Fish and Wildlife Service can certainly inspect wildlife as they come in. They're checking to make sure that they're not CITES listed species or a very rare species. But in general, then the Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't have the authority to regulate health. Now, in a kind of an unprecedented move, Fish and Wildlife Service, with the discovery of B. sal, the recently discovered chytrid fungus, has used a provision of the Lacey Act to stop the importation of species, amphibian species, that could be a susceptible host to B. sal. And therefore, potentially bring the pathogen into the United States. Right now, B. sal is only known to occur in Europe and probably its native region of Southeast Asia. These pathogens, they're can obviously, so we're talking about spillover, have negative impacts on biodiversity, but the pet industry also does suffer significantly from pathogens. We've done a lot of work with pet amphibian pathogens and the pet amphibian industry. And we've estimated that businesses are losing around $140 million a year, which is about 10% of the U.S. global worth of the pet amphibian industry. Businesses can lose, hundreds of thousands of dollars due to pathogens entering their operations. And so, in general, the pet industry is in support of trying to keep these pathogens out because it affects their operations as well. And many folks that are in the pet industry are very supportive of conservation from what our surveys have indicated. Okay, so I think with that, I'm going to pass it on over to Veronica.
Thank you, Matt. Let me just share screen. Okay. Can you guys see my slideshow?
Yes, looks good.
All right, awesome. So thank you for having me. My name is Veronica. I'm here to talk about the Exotic Pet Amnesty Program, and this is a program for you guys that are unfamiliar. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is the wildlife agency of Florida, and this is a program within the FWC. It's a program in which we help people rehome their non-native pets, which include reptiles and amphibians, but isn't restricted to just those. So a quick outline of what we're going to go over. First, we're going to do mission and goals of the program, how it works, the pets that we rehome, and then innovations. So mission and goals. So Florida has a bit of a problem with non-native species in general, which include fish and wildlife. Since 1924, FWC has received a verified amount of 158,000 observations of non-native fish and wildlife. This is constituted of over 600 species, which is pretty high. What is a non-native species, you may be asking? Well, non-native fish and wildlife are species that do not historically occur in the geographic area. In the photos, we've got some snakehead fish on the left, some couple of python species in the middle, and then a nutria on the far right. All of these are non-native to Florida and exist in various degrees in the wild here. And then while these species pictured here are also considered invasive and cause negative impacts to Florida, not all non-native species cause negative impacts to the areas that they are introduced to. If these species aren't from Florida, how do they get here? Well, there are two main pathways in which these non-native species are introduced by. First is unintentional. One unintentional pathway is through hitchhiking or being cargo stowaways. A great example of this is the mongoose that is pictured there, which have been documented hitchhiking on sugar shipments. Another unintentional pathway is through accidental escapes from enclosures. So the big historic one here is during hurricanes, and then animals get loose from their cagings if it's not so secure. Second main pathway of introduction are intentional. This could be when someone purposely releases their non-native pet into the wild. Some examples of this are people no longer being able to take care of their pets, which is very relevant to our program, or people purposely releasing things like monkeys here in Florida for tourism purposes. So, what does it matter if non-native species get introduced to an area? Well, some of those non-native species, as aforementioned before, become invasive. Invasive non-native fish and wildlife are species that cause or are likely to cause harm to Florida's ecology, economy, and human health and safety. Why is Florida so susceptible to invasive species introductions? Well, as Dr. Gray mentioned earlier in his presentation, the herp trade is pretty robust. And when he showed the different states, it seems to be especially robust in Florida. We have multiple ports of entry for importing all these herps. And then finally, herps tend to thrive in our hot subtropical climate, which is the same reason that snowbirds also thrive here. All right, so let's get into those negative impacts. We'll start with ecological. Some negative ecological impacts of invasive species are predating on native wildlife. So Burmese pythons, for example, causing mammal declines in the Everglades, competing or outcompeting native wildlife for resources. An example of this is red-eared slider turtles outcompeting native turtles for things such as basking spots. Another negative ecological impact are environmental alterations. So an example of this is shoreline erosions caused by armored catfish burrowing behaviors. And then lastly, we have diseases, which again is very relevant to this webinar today. Diseases not only potentially affect captive herps, but they could also spill over into native wildlife. Some example of these, in addition to the ones that Dr. Gray mentioned, are snake fungal disease, lungworm pentasomes, turtle Fraser virus, and salmonella, to name a few. All right, economic impacts. So some invasive species can negatively affect things like agricultural productivity. So an example of that are green iguanas, which cause mass crop deprecation in the Caribbean, for example. Then decrease in property values. This could be like Muscovy ducks pooping in your front yard, in your backyard, in your pools. Then we have infrastructure damage, which those monk parakeets pictured there, they tend to build large nests on electrical equipment, which causes power outages and sometimes can even cause fires. And then lastly, of course, there's the cost of managing these invasive species. So not only are we paying for the damages that they cause, we're also paying for managing and controlling them. All right, then we got human health and safety. This one is often the least thought about, but it certainly is important. So first of all, this category actually includes the health and safety of not only humans, but their pets. So earlier we talked about those diseases. Some of those diseases could be transmitted to people as well. Salmonella is a good example of that one. And then another way that these invasive species could cause a risk to your health is by they could like literally hurt you. They can bite you, sting you. So we're thinking of fire ants, for example, scratch you, and then they could give you allergies, allergic reactions, and then some of them could even poison you. So the cane toad picture there, for example, has such potent toxin that they could pose a serious or potentially lethal threat to things such as cats and dogs if they ingest enough venom. All right, so what do you do if you find a non-native species in the wild? First, please report your sighting via I've Got One hotline, webpage, or app. This is a Florida-specific reporting application. However, there are other forms of reporting across different states, and we'll provide resources for that later. Then, when you report your non-native species, what's important is to get the best photo you can of it, and then take down the location and the date of when and where you found it. Even if you're not sure if what you're seeing is a non-native animal, please report it. We rely on the public to report observations, and that helps us assess the distribution and abundance of non-native fish and wildlife, and then that also allows us to appropriately and rapidly respond to those observations if needed. All right, so what is FWC doing about invasive species? There are several ways in which we try to minimize those impacts that we just spoke about. First, we do risk determinations, education and outreach. We have preventative programs such as the Exotic Pet Amnesty Program. Then, of course, we conduct control and management efforts, and then we support research into these invasive species. How does the Exotic Pet Amnesty Program fit into all of this, though? As I mentioned earlier, it is a preventative measure. Some quick history: the program was created and codified in rule in 2006. At the time, it was a way to provide a legal avenue for people that illegally owned large constrictor snakes to rehome them versus choosing to release them into the wild for fear of legal penalty. But since then, the program has greatly expanded and evolved, and now we've taken several hundreds of non-native species, which we will get into shortly. All right, what is the program's mission? It is to help reduce the number of non-native fish and wildlife species intentionally released into the wild. The program does that by removing barriers of rehoming by offering Floridians a free and legal alternative for replacement. Essentially, we help pet owners place their non-native pets. In addition to that, the rehoming aspect of the program also provides education and outreach of responsible pet ownership. An example of this is our Don't Let It Loose messaging, in which we educate pet owners the negative effects of releasing their pets into the wild. How does it all work? Again, purpose of the program is to encourage pet owners to relinquish their non-native pets to qualified adopters that are within our program when they can no longer take care of their pet. The Exotic Pet Amnesty Program does that by, again, a free rehoming service that also provides legal amnesty for pet owners that may illegally own certain species. Part of the reason the program offers that is to encourage people, again, to legally rehome their pet instead of releasing them in fear of legal penalties. What is unique about the program's rehoming process? So we'll start with rehoming. So first, rehoming is free for both the pet owner and the adopter. If the pet owner decides, actually, I want to keep my pet after all, there's no obligations to rehome unless that pet is kept illegally. Other than that, there's no pressure to. We rehome pets year-round. The owners then continue to care for their pet until an adoption is confirmed or coordinated, which then opens up bandwidth of our staff. And then lastly, we do not accept sick or dying pets for rehoming. Then we got the adopters. All of our adopters are vetted. To become an adopter, they must apply with us. They must answer animal care questions that prove to us that they know how to take care of the pets that they're telling us they want to adopt through our program. Adopters could be individuals like you and I. They could be rescues, exhibitors, zoos, aquariums, nature centers, and then we even have some commercial entities as adopters. To date, we've had over 7,700 rehoming requests. And then we have a network of 1,500 adopters and counting. We're always recruiting. And then, though most of our adoptions occur within the state of Florida, we have adopters across the nation in 34 states, which is particularly important for pet species that are prohibited here in Florida. All right, so how does the rehoming work? So while our program does have specialized in-person rehoming events for certain pet species, most of our rehoming does occur virtually. How does that work? The pet owner can no longer take care of their pet. They fill out our online rehoming request form. The form is their contact information, their pet's information. So I've got a turtle. He's 8 inches. It's a boy. He's 30 years old. Really great. Then last part is uploading photos of that pet. The photos are particularly important because then we get to assess if the animal looks apparently sick or unhealthy, injured, bleeding, etc. So that is one way that we kind of vet the pets that we get through. Then, if everything looks good, we reach out to our network of adopters. We go, hey, adopters, there's a 30-year-old turtle that's up for adoption in Fort Lauderdale, Broward County. Is anyone interested? And then we have our adopters. Some people just go, yeah, interested. Others are like, oh my God, I've been waiting my whole life for this animal, and I grow vegetables in the garden that I feed my other turtles. And then all of those replies we then forward to the pet owner via an email that they provide. And then it's now their responsibility to reach out to whatever adopters they wish to follow up with, and then work out the details of the adoption with them. All that we ask is that they let us know when their pet is adopted. So what kind of pets do we get for rehoming? Here's a breakdown of the taxa that we've been asked to rehome since the program started in 2006. You'll quickly notice that the two biggest parts of the pie chart are reptiles. Reptiles themselves make up 64% of all species requested to be rehomed through our program. And then if you look even closer, 34% are turtles and tortoises. So 1/3 of all that we've ever been asked to rehome are turtles and tortoises, which is pretty wild. You'll also notice that amphibians make up such a small percentage of what we get through our program that they even got lumped in with their inverts. But even then, it's only 4%. And we'll get into a little bit why we're so reptile heavy in a later slide. But of almost 7,700 rehoming requests since we first started, 1,700 of those are Florida conditional or prohibited species. So what are Florida conditional and prohibited species? Let's go over it. So you'll see on this table, these are two classifications that exist because we identify species that potentially or do cause a lot of risk and harm to Florida. Both conditional and prohibited species require a permit to possess. However, there is a little bit of differences between the two. So if you look at the table, we'll start with conditional species. So conditional species are not allowed to be possessed as pets after they've been classified as conditional. If you have one before then, you could get them grandfathered in with a permit, but you cannot acquire any new ones. However, it is still allowed, that species is still allowed to be possessed and imported for breeding purposes, for exhibition, and for research, of course, again, with a permit. The difference between conditional and prohibited, however, though, is for prohibited species, not only could you not have them as a pet, personal pet, but you also cannot possess or import them for commercial purposes, but they can still be imported, possessed for exhibition, and research, but again, with a permit. So prohibited species are a little bit more regulated than the conditional. Some other species that our program could get for rehoming are captive wildlife species. So these are your lions, your crocodiles, your capybaras, your emus, your zebras, you name it, pretty exotic species. I won't get into the specifics of the classifications, but this is just to demonstrate just the wide variety of species that we can get for rehoming. In cases of these captive wildlife species, class 1 and 3, we collaborate and assist our captive wildlife officers and investigators in order to place these species, or more of a resource that they can use, and we let them take the lead on those. So, of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of species we can get for rehoming, which do you think are the top species we consistently get for rehoming? Any ideas? If you remember from the pie chart, 64% are reptiles, so what could we possibly get? Okay, so Our top species, our most commonly requested to be rehomed species are red-eared slider turtles, third cousin yellow-bellied sliders, green iguanas, black and white tegus, African spurred tortoises, or commonly known as sulcatas, red-footed tortoises, and then we got the big three that Dr. Gray mentioned earlier, the ball pythons, the bearded dragons, and the leopard geckos. And then here are some photos of those species in case anyone's unfamiliar. So these are lizards, the snake, and then we got our turtles and tortoises. Innovations. So, like any other program, we are constantly facing and overcoming challenges. While this program has significantly grown and consistently is evolving, rehoming demands still remain pretty high. Again, the pet trade is really big here in Florida, and our rehoming demands have actually increased significantly in the past few years. Another big challenge are there are some species that are just a little bit particularly difficult to rehome. And here are some innovations which we've implemented to address those challenges. First, we are constantly streamlining and automating our rehoming process. We've got a new database and portal on the horizon. We've been launching adopter recruitment campaigns in the recent years. And then we've upped our out-of-state adoptions for those prohibited and conditional species. And then finally, as Matt mentioned that he has also been doing, but we've also have started working with the pet industry in order to achieve some of our rehoming and conservation goals. An example of that is rehoming slider turtles. So, quick background, slider turtles, particularly red-eared sliders, are one of the most difficult species to rehome for us and kind of in general. Rehoming options for them are limited since they are long-lived. They grow large and they need ponds for housing. They require a permit here in Florida to possess, and they're just abundant in numbers. And generally, there isn't much interest from adopters to adopt them compared to other turtle or pond species that they could adopt. For example, like snapping turtles or African side necks. And then, if you guys remember, of the 7,700 all-time rehoming requests that we've had, 1,700 of those were conditional prohibited species, but 1,200 alone, so about 1/8 of what we've gotten all time, are red-eared sliders. One species alone. That is pretty crazy. And then that number doesn't include any of the hybrids because they could hybridize with yellow-bellied and Cumberland sliders, so that the number is actually a lot larger than that. So that's just to demonstrate the sheer volume of sliders that are requested to be rehomed. So how do we go about rehoming these guys? Well, recently we've been hosting special in-person rehoming events. These rehoming events are events where pet owners of slider turtles could drop off their sliders to FWC staff. The turtle is then examined by a veterinarian, make sure they're nice and healthy, and then if they are, we accept them to rehome, and then we rehome all the turtles that we got from our event to a permitted commercial entity who is also an adopter in our program. So, and then at that point, they could rehome those sliders out of state because, again, nobody in Florida could have them as a pet without a permit. So they are sold and rehomed out of state. So, though we've only had 2 of these events so far, it has been a reliable way to rehome mass amounts of turtles. And one time, this method also ensures an added level of wellness checking before the animals are moved and rehomed around. So not only do we have a veterinarian at our event, but there's also a secondary veterinary check at the entity's facility before the turtles are rehomed out of state. So while the Exotic Pet Amnesty Program was primarily created back in 2006 to focus, and currently does, focusing on keeping non-native fish and wildlife out of the wild here in Florida, we do have some measures of wellness checking the pets before they're rehomed through our program, which is, again, looking at those photos in the rehoming form, and then in the in-person events, it's the veterinary checks. But it is important to consider disease transmission when animals are being rehomed and moved around. And so with that said, I'll pass it along to Dr. Gray to go over those considerations and his rehoming program.
Okay. All right. So I was monitoring some of the questions that were being brought up and tried to reply to as many as I could. And of course, we'll take some questions here at the end. Um, Very brief overview of what the Healthy Trade Institute is. We call it HTI. Okay, so we are an official charitable 501(c)(3) charitable nonprofit organization here in the US. And our goal is really to empower businesses to champion healthy trade practices and in their operations to ultimately enhance the well-being of the pets that they have in their operations, as well as protect wildlife from any possible pathogen spillover. We are science-driven with a focus on preventing disease, and we have two programs that we lead. One is healthy trade certification for businesses, and the other is a nationwide herp adoption program. And I encourage you to please go to our website, healthytrade.org, for lots of details. This is going to be a very abbreviated presentation on the HTI. This is our overall vision of us working with the pet trade industry. So we launched here in the US with amphibians, pet amphibians in 2024 and expanded to reptiles in 2025. And this all came out of lots of discussions with the pet trade industry coming and approaching us here at the University of Tennessee and talking about what could be some out of the box sort of ideas with respect of innovative strategies to reduce pathogens and trade, but also to prevent that spillover. And so what we did at the first Global Amphibian and Reptile Disease Conference that was held here in Knoxville, Tennessee back in 2022, we brought together folks from across industry, so multiple businesses that were really kind of leading this movement, this initiative, as well as folks from universities and the USDA, APHIS. And we asked, what should a healthy trade sort of what strategies could we come up with? And that really led to the creation of the HTI and the two programs that we lead. All right, so the first program, the Healthy Trade Certification Program, this is the Cliff Note version of it. Again, more details on our website, is that pet businesses that sell pet amphibians or reptiles sign up for membership with us. And actually, the membership fee is tiered based on their annual sales of amphibians or reptiles, where smaller businesses have a smaller fee compared to larger businesses. They are required to do online training and testing that really familiarize them with a variety of things, including the components of the program. They're required to incorporate certain biosecurity practices like having a quarantine area, changing gloves between habitats, using disinfectants, etc. They're required to do some animal testing, both to become a member of the HTI. So there's initial testing that's done within their business, and then new animals that come into new shipments that arrive. And we actually have approved diagnostic laboratories, which I'll share with you in a little bit, that have gone through quality control testing that have shown their competency with respect to identifying the target pathogens. And then if there is a positive detection, there's a response, including isolation, possible treatment. The business can also, choose to euthanize animals if they want. But the HTI is here to actually provide that consultation, face to face or Zoom to Zoom, to talk about how to isolate an outbreak and how to treat the animals if a treatment exists. And And what we found through our surveys is that this is industry led, but it can be market driven. And what I mean by that is that pet owners here in the US are willing to pay significantly more to know that their animals are coming to them that are free of at least these pathogens that are of concern to their own pet, maybe their pet collection, because a lot of pet owners have multiple pets that are worth a lot of money invested. But also the conservation issues, which, as I mentioned before, many pet owners are pet amphibian and reptile owners are very conservation conscientious. And so what we found is that actually that businesses that sell pet amphibians and reptiles can actually increase their profit margins. There's an opportunity for market expansion by incorporating healthy trade practices and be able to certify animals as healthy trade certified. So the businesses themselves can use our logo that they can use for marketing to know that the animals they're receiving are free of certain pathogens. Okay, so that's, again, the Cliff Note version of our certification program. Visit healthytrade.org to learn more about it. Also happy to visit with folks offline as well. The other component of it is the aspect of pathogen spillover and release, which is also overlaps with invasive species. So there's lots of folks in the chat that were talking about amnesty programs in different states, et cetera. FWC's program is a great amnesty program in Florida. But in general, the most amnesty programs, you have to drive your animal to a particular site. A lot of the programs that exist out there in the rescue centers don't accept amphibians and reptiles. And so there's the opportunity and accessibility to adoption or to surrendering your animal is not uniform across the United States. In fact, it's actually, there are hot spots that occur where there's lots of opportunities and then a desert of not very many opportunities through the majority of our states. And again, I think Florida is the only state agency run program that exists, which is a great program. But again, it's only offered for Florida residents too. So we are starting and we have launched the first nationwide herp adoption program. And what's really kind of unique, currently we are accepting pet amphibians, bearded dragons, and ball pythons, and we hope to expand by September to all non-venomous snakes, and then also geckos starting in 2026, which are really comprise a lot of the traded animals. And what's unique about our particular program is this is a partnership with the University of Tennessee, but number one, we're nationwide. Number two, we accept shipped animals. We have an approval through our state veterinarian office to receive animals without certificates of inspection. So we can receive those animals. They come to a biosecure facility that the HTI rents from the University of Tennessee. We bring them into that facility. And then those animals, the shipping process, very important, is facilitated by Redline Shipping. They offer a 65% discount for individuals that are surrendering to the HTI. They'll send them a shipping kit and they use their expertise to basically guide the individual to how to package the animal and to send it safely to the HTI. Once they're received at the HTI, they are then tested for key pathogens. I'll talk about what those are. And then the other really unique aspect is that the University of Tennessee College of Veterinary Medicine has access to our animals. And so they can come over, they can do health inspections, they can train their students, et cetera. So we're really contributing to training the next generation of exotic pet veterinarians across the United States. And then to link back into our certification program, HTI business members have adoption priority. So this is a way for us to get those animals back into the trade network. And for those animals that our business members do not sell or they do not want, then we have a storefront that's actually run through husbandry.pro is our partnership where the HTI is able to then actually sell to individuals. And of course, because we're doing our testing, those animals, again, are healthy trade certified. What does the testing look like? And so this has been a collective effort of multiple professionals across the United States, both from academia as well as industry. And I'm sure a lot of you recognize those names on there. And so we can't test for everything, but we are testing for pathogens that are either concerned to industry themselves or to conservation. We also have to have a very easily collectible sample, so a non-lethal sample that can be collected in a reliable diagnostic test. The gold standard is quantitative PCR. And so with amphibians, rhinovirus and the two chytrid fungi are listed underneath of our healthy trade certification. Reptiles, again, right now we're accepting bearded dragons, ball pythons. Those animals, so beardeds are tested for adenovirus, and snakes, Cryptosporidium and Ophidiomices. We are in discussion right now about expanding to other species of reptiles and other pathogens in 2026. With respect to geckos, which will probably roll in 2026, will probably include Cryptosporidium serpentis, which a lot of geckos can become infected with as well. So with that, we'll launch. Let me double check the time. We might be running short. Okay, we got a couple minutes. Yeah, let's launch our last poll before we end, and then we'll take some questions.
Hey, just launched it.
Excellent. Okay, so this first question is related to, have you ever heard of those pathogens? I wanted to change the slide so you didn't look back at them. Prior to this presentation, just kind of curious about y'all's knowledge about these amphibian pathogens. And let me see if I got to scroll down to see the second question. Oh yeah, how much would you be willing to pay? And this is related to, like, if you buy and this is amphibians we're talking about. That's where most of our data exists so far. If you're willing to pay, if you buy an amphibian from wherever for 20 bucks, how much would you be willing to pay to know that it comes from an HTI business or that it's healthy trade certified the way that I described it, negative for those pathogens, so BD, B-cell, and rotavirus? And what would you be willing to pay if you spent $250? Would it change? So we'll leave this open for just a little bit.
Matt, while people are answering, we're recording all the comments in the chat and the whole chat itself. So if there's any people that you or Veronica want to reach out to after the webinar, you'll have who they were, and then you'll also have the registration document.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I tried to reply to as many as possible when Veronica was talking, but don't hesitate to reach out to either Veronica or myself. And we'd be happy to chat more about opportunities to collaborate or guidance that we can provide. Oh, since this is going here, and I think can everybody also see my slide in the background?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'll just mention that the third Global Amphibian and Reptile Disease Conference is in 2026. Those are the dates for it. It's going to be in Knoxville, Tennessee. The last one was 2024, so last year. It was in Malaysia. So that was really fun to go over there, but also great to bring it back to old Rocky Top here in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Awesome. We have 85% people of the participants that answered. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Okay. All right. So a lot of folks have heard about rotavirus and the chytrid fungi. Not surprising. The chytrid fungi, BD's been associated with the global decline of over 500 amphibian species, the extinction of nearly 100. So a lot of folks have heard, know about that. Rotaviruses infect fish, reptiles, and amphibians. So they can affect lots of different host species. B-cell is obviously recently discovered and hasn't been detected here in the U.S. Or actually even the Western Hemisphere, just over in Europe so far. And obviously in Southeast Asia, where it's believed to come from. Adenovirus and some of the reptile pathogens a little bit less. And then, of course, salmonella. A lot of folks have heard about salmonella, especially related to folks getting sick by handling maybe a reptile or a turtle or something, and then maybe getting salmonella, ingesting salmonella. Let's see, and how much would you be willing to pay? So yeah, I mean, a lot of folks are willing to, hey, I'm willing to invest even up to the amount that I'm paying for a $20 animal. And with respect to, a more expensive animal, yeah, I'm still kind of around that $20 to $50 range. And that's kind of what our surveys have showed, that when we've asked broadly across kind of the pet industry, what would you be willing to pay? And obviously some even more than that. And a lot of it has to do, what's not in there is the rarity of the species and things like that, that obviously folks would be willing to pay more. So yeah, with that, we can, I guess, stop sharing, take a few questions. Those who are interested. I'm not sure.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I'm gonna ask a couple questions. Matt, I know you have to hop off at 3:10. We have some questions that haven't been answered just yet. So from Corinna, actually, have you met with US ARC and how do they respond to your AIMS and HTI missions?
Excellent question. So yeah, so for those that aren't familiar, US ARC represents the pet reptile and amphibian keeper industry. And so we actually have a request in to US ARC. They're meeting in early June. Their board is, and to ask them to review our protocols and to endorse the HTI. And so we're hopeful that we will receive their endorsement.
Thank you. For Veronica, we have a question from Natalie Stillwell. Do you worry about adopters abusing this program if they are adopting for commercial purposes, i.e. to resell the animal?
Not particularly, because there's a few ways that kind of stop that. So first is a pet owner that's rehoming a pet that's not regulated, so not the prohibited, not like the endangered ones, just a beardy, a chinchilla, macaws, etc. So we give them multiple adopters to choose from. They could ask the adopters, like, hey, like, what do you do? Can you show me the caging? And then, of course, it's up to the adopter and the pet owner to determine how comfortable they are with each other. But ultimately, again, there's no obligation, and then they get to choose who they adopt their pet out to. And some people are hesitant to rehome with commercial sellers or commercial entities, and also some commercial entities keep them as personal pets. They don't end up selling them. But also the commercial entities we have here in Florida are permitted through the same agency, through us, and we do investigations, and we do routine, at least twice a year, I believe it is, on them for them in order to retain their permit. So our captive wildlife officers and investigators go to their facilities. They make sure cleanliness, wellness, inventory, everything, paperwork is up to date. And I'm sure they do way more than what I'm saying, but there's like a level of vettedness. And also, when anybody applies to be an adopter through us, I didn't mention this part, we run background checks on them. So we see wildlife and animal abuse violations, and we run those background checks every 3 years. So like, you could be a adopter with us back in 2006, but every 3 years since, to make sure, like, suddenly you're not like, abusing animals or etc. So we have some ways to do it. And then I think just the fact that we're the state government agency also helps build some of that vettedness.
Awesome. Thank you, Veronica. That answered my question of how adopters get vetted and kind of what that process looks like. I guess a question for both of you are, what are the primary reasons for the trade of wild-caught herps? Is it because some species are too difficult to raise in captivity? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I did provide a response in there, but so I'll just share that with the rest of the group if you didn't see it, at least with respect to what we have heard from businesses that are the best to really answer this question. Is yeah, so it can be, and a lot of times it is, at least initially, not knowing the breeding requirements for the animal, and so they're caught from the wild. Another is to, even if you know the breeding requirements, is to increase the genetic diversity of the animals that you're breeding. And third is that a lot of the wild-caught animals are cheaper than captive bred. And I'm sure there are other reasons too, that the pet industry makes decisions.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks so much. Veronica, did you have anything to add?
I was gonna echo what Dr. Gray said, and some animals are hard to breed in captivity, or we just don't, they get too stressed, for example.
Awesome. Well, it is 3:08, so I think we'll wrap this up now, and stop recording. But I just want to thank the speakers again and everyone who came. And we will share their websites and resources when we send out the recording link to all of the registrants. So thank you so much for your time, and I will stop recording now unless you guys have anything else you wanted to add.
Oh, thanks a bunch. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Jenna, I
Yeah.
don't know, can you hear me? There's
Yes.
questions in the Q&A. Are we going to just answer those online and post them?
Yes, so if there's any further questions that haven't been answered, we'll have those, we can send them to Matt and Veronica and they can answer those and we can share that with everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Awesome.
Thanks a bunch, y'all. I would stay longer, but I have a meeting at 3:15, so
No worries. Thanks so much.
yeah, take care.